Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to next era of data economy discussion event. My name is Laura Halenius. Together with my colleague Markus Kalliola, we will act as moderators for this event. It is truly a pleasure to have you here in Helsinki today to discuss and find common ground on the issues of fair data economy. Welcome to our online viewers as well, who are joining us through live stream.
EU elections are only 2 weeks away, and that will kick off an interesting year for us all, but especially for us Finns. We will host the EU presidency at a time when both the new EU Parliament and the new EU Commission will take place. Will fear populism or difficult transatlantic relations define the years to come? Or will we have a future-looking and brave agenda where opportunities drive the change? Today we will discuss the latter. First, Lucas Ilves and David Osimo will present the policy brief on fair data economy that was published last month. Then Professor Jürgen Bott will speak about the data economy in the financial sector. Following, we will have 2 panel discussions, and the day will be closed by Jaana Sinipura. You will have a chance to ask questions, so be prepared for that. We will also have a poll in Twitter, so please go to the Sitra Fund account during the day and answer to that poll.
Let's turn to our opening speech that will help paint the big picture about the fair data economy. I would like to now invite on stage Lucas Ilves, Deputy Director at Lisbon Council, and David Osimo, Director of Research at the Lisbon Council. Please, Lucas and David, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Yes. So, we're not going to give you kind of a dry summary of the paper today. You all have to read it, after all. It's 50 pages, but it's an easy read. I think we want to maybe open up some of the underlying logic and the ideas behind it, and to think about how this relates to the current political moment. And to do that, I think we should travel back in time to 2009. Think about where discussions on digitization and digital policy were 10 years ago. It was an unbelievably positive narrative. These were technologies that were going to liberate us, that were going to change the world. The Arab Spring was just taking hold. We had this optimistic belief that these technologies would lead to an enlightenment and a democratization of the world, a belief that really has sort of followed much of the discussion on digitization and the internet from the beginning. Now, that all seems hopelessly naive today. I mean, even 5 years ago, at the beginning of the digital single market, when the last commission took office in Brussels, the hope in Europe was that the digital agenda was primarily a positive economic agenda. If you look today at what the discussion is, and if you want to avoid appearing hopelessly naive, you talk about the dangers of digitization, the threat to democracy, monopolies in digital markets. And that's the environment in which we find ourselves. And so I think the challenge we faced with this paper, especially in putting something together that was aimed at how we can do something positive in Europe, was how do we acknowledge those difficulties? How do we deal with the fact that there are indeed quite a few grievances over what to do with the digital agenda, but not get stuck in that, not get stuck in a fairly destructive narrative that basically is more about controlling the status quo and mitigating damages, and it's not about building a positive future. So what we've tried to do with this paper is to really look at a kind of constructive pragmatism, where yes, we recognize the threats that we face, but we also look a bit more optimistically toward the future. Okay, this is already for David. So that's a basic sort of scene setting for the paper. And this is, we're not unique in doing this. There are a lot of people who have been talking since GDPR came about of the idea of a European third way for the digital economy. And that has been mostly a fairly content-free discussion. Because basically what they've said is, well, Europe is going to regulate, and that is the third way. And that's the beginning of the discussion. It's clear that there are places where government intervention is needed, but again, it doesn't tell us what type of an ecosystem we want to build. And so what we've effectively done with this paper is we've given a potential answer to what this European third way could look like. Though we think it has global implications, we think it is idealistic, but it's also pragmatic at the same time. And finally, I want to comment maybe on how this fits in with the Finnish presidency. Because what you will see in this paper, and certainly what guided us as we wrote it, was to be somewhat inspired by what's going on with the data economy in Finland. The way in which the public and the private sector are cooperating with each other, legislation that has enabled new types of data markets, some things that you've actually already done, other things that are still on the drawing board or taking a bit more time to realize in practice, which is not a criticism. I mean, some of these things are hard to do. We've tried to be inspired by Finland, but this isn't a paper about Finnish ideas. And I think this is something important for the presidency, which is you might sometimes be too modest here in Finland in what you've done and what you are doing, in the sense that you think that these are Finnish ideas, and you think that these are uniquely Finnish solutions, and you have to kind of start from zero in explaining them elsewhere in Europe. And you might be modest in promoting those ideas as a result. And what we found in this paper, what we found in looking at data markets in quite a few sectors, in healthcare and transport and elsewhere, is that there are interesting innovators everywhere in Europe, both on the private sector and the public sector side. So Professor Jürgen Bott's going to talk about financial services, a country where Spain is doing some of the most interesting innovation. If you look at transport, even the good old German companies are doing a lot of interesting things. Belgium is a hotbed of innovation when it comes to mobility, and so on and so forth. You will find allies everywhere in Europe. So the one sort of counsel I would give you to your presidency is you think about how you present yourself to Europe in the next 6 months at a time where we have a new commission, a new parliament, everyone's open to what a new agenda could look like, is don't be modest. Put your ideas out there, and don't put them out there as Finnish ideas. Put them out there as good ideas that take inspiration from Finland. I think that's how we approach some of the ideas in this paper. And to kind of explain what those ideas are, we're going to kick off with David, please.
Thanks, Lucas. So, as Lucas said, ultimately what we try to achieve is there a way to balance the need for individual data protection and agency of individuals over data on the one hand, and maximize data reuse on the other hand? Is this a trade-off, or can we find a way to balance this and to achieve these goals at the same time? And the first thing we set off to do is understand the problem and understand what we are talking about. So let me show you with very simplistic charts, and forgive me if they are too simple, but they reflect 3 situations. Thank you. The first is the situation pre-GDPR, situation where the individual provides the data, the consent to a service provider, receive the service in exchange, and then somehow the control over this data is lost. The service provider shared this data with the third parties, and ultimately this data end up who knows where, maybe in Cambridge Analytica. Now, the alternative that has come up the alternative that has come up as a reaction to that is an alternative based on strong data ownership by individuals, and this has come up in the initial ideas maybe of the My Data movement, but also in the recent project like Decode, in the Solid project of Tim Berners-Lee. The idea is to emphasize data control by the individual, and so to let the individual decide with whom, for what purpose, share the data. And this is a model that places the individual at the center. The individual gives data and consent to to one service provider, and then gives data and consent to other service provider, and has full control over this data. Even more, it can monetize this data, ideally. What we think is that this model of strong data ownership doesn't scale well enough and does not allow the level of data reuse that we wish. We need a more agile and more scalable model where we don't create new silos, but we allow data sharing under the control of the individual. And this is more or less what we propose. So a model where there is no center, there is no hub, there is a distributed system where the individual provides data and consent to a service provider, and the service provider can share this data upon consent of the individual with a third party. And this third party can provide a service to the original individual. So It's a model where different parties interact, different parties share data, and the individual consent is ensured. Now, this model is obviously ambitious. It's a model that presents challenges as well as opportunities. But it's also a model that is driven by profound trends. We have identified a set of policy, technological, and business trends that, excuse me, that underlie this model. Lucas.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with the policy trends. And I think the point when we look at what's going on already now on the EU policy landscape, and generally, after having been in Brussels for 5 years, I can say it's never good that you focus too much on what's going on in Brussels, but the presidency is an exception. And collectively in Finland, everyone's going to need to live and breathe EU regulation and policy for the next 6 months. So I hope you forgive me if this is a very EU-focused picture, although in the reality you also have a lot of similar things going on at a national level. And these slides are all in the paper. So instead of taking pictures, read the paper. I think that the point, if you look, and the point of this picture, and this is laid out in the paper, is that if you go into different policy silos, large parts of the policy-making enterprise of Brussels, of the European Commission, the Council, the Parliament, have been grappling with this question from their various different perspectives. The big sort of rock in the center of the room, of course, is the GDPR. And the GDPR creates, among other data rights, a right to data portability, Article 20. And what Article 20 says in a very simplistic way is that you as a data subject have a right to request that your data in machine readable form be forwarded to another service provider. The problem with Article 20 is it has some pretty severe limitations. First of all, what it says is that data has to be forwarded within 1 month. So that doesn't really lead to kind of live, real-time data reuse scenarios. It excludes entirely the public sector. It doesn't specify what exactly common machine-readable formats mean. And so there's some very different understandings over what Article 20 means in practice. On one end, you have the sort of what you might call a Finnish vision, or a my data vision, which is Article 20 is an enabling measure to have real-time reuse of data based on consent or permission in a wide range of sectors, across different sectors. You basically would have terabytes flowing all the time, petabytes under Article 20. The more conservative vision, which a lot of European companies that are complying with this sort of seem to think that it means, is it's a bit like number portability in the telecom sector, which is, it's a nice consumer protection measure, so if I change providers, then they have to get my data to the new provider eventually. It gets used every once in a while. It's not such a big game changer. And the reality is still being developed because it depends on what it is that data protection agencies actually go after in enforcement, what the sort of soft industry guidance that develops, et cetera, are. But what we can say for now is that when it comes to the data rights, it's probably not the #1 data right that is at the front mind of regulators. First of all, if we look at what consumers are aware of, they are more aware of, and they seem to care more about things like right to be forgotten or to deletion, even the right to download a copy of their own data. That's not bad news in and of itself, because in a sense, right to deletion, if you're thinking about individual agency, it's kind of the first thing you have to start off with. If you know that you can fundamentally require that your data ultimately be deleted, that is a foundation to then start building the confidence to also allow it to be reused. But we're not there. We're not at a point where consumers make the connection where, okay, I have the right to deletion, and therefore I feel comfortable with portability. And if we look at enforcement actions, well, frankly, there's enough low-hanging fruit with companies doing malicious or stupid things that, as much as I would like to, and we do recommend in this paper that data protection authorities be fairly aggressive on right to data portability, the reality is if I'm a data protection authority, I'm facing scandals, I'm facing limited resources, I'm facing political pressure, pressure from privacy lobbyists. Probably, if I spend all of my time and all my resources on Article 20 enforcement, I'm probably not doing my job. But the good news in all of this is GDPR is not the only bit of the game. And a lot of different sectors have been looking at these questions in their own sectoral ways. So the one that sort of everyone talks about the most, because it's the most clear, sort of bit of single regulation with very clear technical norms that has an immediate impact on markets is the updated Payment Services Directive. So basically making open banking rules mandatory. We won't talk about that in length, in part because we have a whole half-hour presentation on that following us, and we very much look forward to seeing what Professor Bott has to say about this. But you see similar discussions in many different sectors. So one of the front runners, for instance, has been automotive, where they actually had their first discussions on data reuse and access in the 90s. But those rules that they came up with in the 90s, they basically dealt with the limited amount of data that a car produced in 2000 or 15 years ago. Well, now we have smart cars that are producing per car gigabytes, if not terabytes, of sensor and visual data. How do we deal with the ownership of that, the portability of that? A lot of discussions going on in the healthcare sector, and I know you've had some interesting legislative developments on that in Finland. People in energy are looking at how do we build this sort of smart home scenario that ultimately has profound implications on the carbon footprint of our, what you do at home, where basically if you actually have smart devices that are connected to each other, you can cut your peak energy consumption by 20%. And if 20% may not sound a lot, but peak energy consumption is basically what determines whether you can have renewables-based or whether you need to have more coal and gas-based energy generation. So it can make a real big difference in moving to solar, hydro, and other renewable forms of energy. So basically right now we're in a situation where pretty much every DG in the Commission, every policy area has kind of thought through a first-generation digital strategy. Some of them have legislation, others don't. And they all kind of have some version of recognizing the same usefulness of sharing data more broadly. Data portability plays a role, but it's not consolidated into a clear strategy. It's not consolidated into a clear vision. Everywhere you have these sort of political fights now between different participants, economic participants in the sector. You have those who see that they could win. You have those that see that they could lose. So you'll hear about that again in banking, where some banks are fairly conservative. Maybe there are some optimistic ones. You've got startups in the game. You've got regulators. It's a fairly difficult political economy constellation. And in general, consumers and citizens aren't that active in the discussion. Because they don't, these are complex terms. If I go to someone on the street and say, well, what do you think about the PSD2? Or, what do you think about the renewed PSI directive? They're going to kind of scratch their head. But it's not greenfield, and this is, I think, the really important point. This discussion is not starting from zero. There's a lot of expertise on this. There's a lot of regulatory knowledge. There's a lot of political discussion that's gone on. Some of these topics, they're not quite at the top of the political agenda in the way that terrorism and migration are, but they're actually, if you look in consumer protection issues, if you look in economic regulation, these are some of the top questions that people are looking at. And you actually have niche consumer groups in a lot of countries that are fairly involved. And so what that means is the ground is fairly fertile for a policy agenda that sews these things together and creates a bit more of a common line across these things. But it's a danger in Brussels that you always get stuck in regulation and forget what's actually going on in the real world. And I think for us, one of the most interesting findings of this paper that we didn't really expect going into this until we looked at things more systematically is how far along market developments are. And I think I'm going to hand over now to David to talk about that a bit.
Yes, so this is not just the wish of policymakers. And I'll go to the slides in annex to show this is related to some underlying trends of the economy. So where we're talking about moving to a new framework, we are, for instance, referring to the emergence of the subscription economy. Advertising is no longer the only game in town when it comes to the internet economy. Music industry have bounced back, as we studied with Tosto a few months ago, thanks to subscriptions. The New York Times itself went back into revenue growth thanks to subscription. Subscription is not only a new business opportunity. Subscription produces a huge amount of data. Spotify is actually the largest data, one of the largest data holders in Europe when it comes to consumer data. And this provides also a different relation between the user and the provider of the service. Data can be used not to provide to target advertising, but can be also used to provide value-added services. The user sees the advantage of sharing data with the service provider. At the same time, we shouldn't be crazily optimistic. As Lucas said, we live in the market, the developments are interesting, but at the same time, consumers do not know and do not care about data portability as things stand today. We do not have a mature market, we do not have a mature demand. This is a very important point for the policy recommendation that will follow. There are new business models, the subscription business model. Where is the, it's there probably, yeah. And there are also, for instance, API is definitely not a new business model. What is new is not only that it continues to grow, but that it becomes increasingly profitable. 1/3 of API are now provided at a price. So you can build new business models. For instance, data holder could provide advanced API and price this API to reusers. And API are becoming increasingly profitable and increasingly invested in. We also have new technological development, maturity of new tools. We have the so-called personal information management that were originally built as a form of control by the user of its data, are now moving towards becoming value-added service provided, for instance, in providing analytics service to the users about how it spends its money, how it behaves, how healthy his lifestyle is. So there is a transformation of this original personal information manager into actual analytics service provider. And there is a maturity of the technical stack. EIDs, consent management platforms are becoming standardized and available to companies to create this technical stack that is required to ensure the achievement of individual data control and greatest data reuse. All this is leading to what we design as an ideal situation. The ideal world, and what we would have is consumers that expect control over data, but also expect data portability, that choose their server provider based on the level of data portability that it ensures. For instance, they choose their bank because it allows third-party finance analytics service to access this data, and the user can download an app and analyze his own spending pattern. We have a data holder that ensure effective data portability. Effective data portability means API. Means you don't download the data and then you re-upload them and having to clean them up, but you have scalable, machine speed data sharing. And the third point, you have new data-driven services. You have new startups, or also old companies that provide value-added services by reusing the data, by porting the data of the users and making value-added services, offering to the users value-added service. What we know is that the situation today is not ideal. We are not there. And it's not sure that we will get there. We have drivers. We have policy drivers. We have technological drivers, business drivers. Consumers are increasingly concerned about control over data. This doesn't mean that all is given, all is mature. As we see, consumers don't care enough and don't know about data portability. Data holders do not see yet a business model, or most data holders do not see their business model in data portability, do not see how they can monetize their data, they can share the data, and not lose competitive advantage. And this is a crucial problem. And third, we don't have enough data-driven services in Europe. We don't have a supply that makes consumers aware of the importance of data portability. We don't have enough of these value-added services that provide really usable, easy services for the layman, for everyone, not just for the few data enthusiasts that are out there. And so what we say is that this is a virtuous circle. We can get there, but we are not there. We are at the moment of uncertainty about whether we will get there or not, and we put forward a few ideas how to get there.
Right, so the paper has a roadmap. The bad news in the roadmap is there's no one silver bullet. You know, we don't say pass this regulation and everything will work out great. And indeed, building ecosystems on a European level is even more challenging than building national ecosystems. But for the obvious reasons of the size of the single market, it's something we do need to do. We're not gonna summarize the entire roadmap. We only have 7 minutes and we want to leave some space for questions, but maybe a few thoughts on a roadmap and Europe and the next 6 months that you have. I think the first one is that you have a lot of convening power, and so use that to really bring together the people who are discussing these things in different places, and in particular help the people in different sectors realize the commonalities. So help, the director in DG Move and the director in DG Energy sit together and talk outwards about where those commonalities are. So for instance, what we do recommend is that there's a lot of enforcement work to be done on GDPR and getting the norms that we have there working in a way that is actually useful and where consumers can act on those rights. There's one addition that a number of the companies we spoke to said, which is that a clear emphasis on well-formed APIs would help us go a long way. So that's a discussion that you can really pull in a lot of different areas. Focus also on where government can lead by example. That might mean voluntarily complying with GDPR Article 20 in public services, but also changing your public procurement rules and looking at how you use EU funding. I mean, we have a big new R&D funding program, Horizon Europe, that's going to be approved, hopefully, if not finally approved by the end of the Finnish presidency, then a lot of substantive work will be done during the Finnish presidency. I see some colleagues here think it will be approved by the end of the Finnish presidency, which is a good thing. So see if you can still work in some good ideas there. And work on building these sectoral ecosystems, which ultimately means bringing a lot of people together behind the same tables. David, do you want to add anything about the roadmap?
I think we also have a notable emphasis on providing infrastructure. This refers to removing bottlenecks, and I think one key bottleneck is interoperability of consent management. We see the progress that Hian has done on that, but at the moment consent management platforms are very much in-house and designed for managing consent within an organization. But what is important is to go to manage consent across organization, and we have some pilots, but we don't have it yet.
Yeah, the last thing to say is this roadmap is a discussion starter. There are a lot of good ideas that are not here. I know that because some of those good ideas were given by some people we interviewed who are in this room. And with that, maybe I think we have time for a few questions. And I know that Finns believe of themselves that they're quiet. It's not actually true. You guys love to talk. So given the right stimulus. So please prove that mistaken notion wrong.
Yes. Thanks, Lucas. Exactly 5 minutes left for the questions. I just want to compliment you on a great presentation, and especially what David said about that you have laid out the vision, but we are not there yet. We have sort of a momentum, but you have laid out the roadmap, and we all have some things to do in it, so you're kind of challenging us here. But please, let's have a question. If you have questions, please raise your hand, and you will have a mic. We have here one question. Do we have 2 questions? Let's take them both, and then you have a chance to answer those 2 questions.
One mic.
Anna.
Please.
Okay, I'll go first. Okay, hey, thanks for the presentation. I'm Martti Villebrand. I'm a lawyer specializing in data protection. You said here, which I agree, that most consumers don't care. But I have another thinking around this, which is perhaps around trust and brand. Trust is an element on the consumer side, brand on the business side. I think that there's that trust can be broken, and we've seen a number of instances where the trust has been broken, and data protection being there one of those key elements breaking that trust, and that then leading to consumers actually caring a lot and in mass. I just wonder, you have any reflections on that? I would like to comment that. Is that visible here in your work?
Yes. And okay. See now, does it work? Does it work? No. Yes.
Thanks. I'm Bo Harald. I'm very glad to hear this start of this discussion here. The My Data obviously is something that we seriously believe in, and what we do owe to the citizens of Europe is, of course, to make data useful. For that we need a narrative, the live event-driven service design, where the data is actually coming to them automatically in intelligent ways. So we need a narrative for that, to create the suction, the pull from everyone that is using any service. And you could, of course, ask that what are the consumer organizations doing to create this pull? I think it's now their turn to stand up and actually say that, yes, we need live event-based service design the My Data way to control, the protection, everything. But I probably don't need to ask if you agree.
I think we do. We had a lot of fighting in this paper, though, over the word to use. And we ultimately, after discussing this a lot with Sitra and quite a few people in Brussels, we went with the word fair. Fair is an imperfect word. It has a lot of baggage, but in a way that's useful because it's used in a lot of different contexts. It's already present in EU legislation, and it's something that people do like. And you have to deal with that baggage, but we think what fair encapsulates is the idea that all of the participants in the ecosystem potentially can win. So that's one possibility for building the narrative. It's not the only one. On the question that you had about whether consumers care or not, you're absolutely right, actually. Things have shifted. I mean, if you looked at privacy 5 years ago, there was something called the privacy paradox where people said consumers don't care about privacy at all. That's no longer the case. They do care, and we cite in the paper a number of studies that show consumers both claim a willingness to and in practice do withhold their data if they're worried about privacy practices. They do use the right to be forgotten. What they don't yet do is they don't think in the same way about portability. So I think the challenge, the good news there is that actually it's possible to get consumers to care. They can be made aware of these things, and that has happened. But so far it's been more in the negative sense of fear leading them to take some reactive actions. And I think the challenge is how do we also get them to care about the enabling side? And there we have some ideas, but no clear answer.
I mean, it's a systemic problem. We need to change the behavior of different actors at the same time. We need new incumbents to share data, consumers to demand data sharing, new startups to provide this data. And as Lucas suggested when we wrote this paper, this is not dissimilar with what happened with environmental challenges and the circular economy. Systemic change, there is no single lever, and we need to pull a little bit of them all. And I think we should learn lessons from what happened in other policy domains, environment and climate change.
Okay, we are almost out of time, but we take one more question. If there is a quick question, short question, please, you have the mic, you can go.
Okay, cheers. I'm Jussi Mäkinen from Technology Industries of Finland, and it's more of a comment. What I feel is that what the GDPR has brought with it on the company side is heightened risk awareness and non-analytical fears on data processing. And what I feel that in post-GDPR era in Europe, what we need very quickly actually are functioning processes and good practices on using data on a way that fulfills the criteria of the GDPR. And I think this is the biggest challenge for the next Commission, since the time window is very short.
Agreed. There's one caveat. All of what you said, and to be fair, a lot of what we recommend, it's not sexy in the current logic of the Commission that measures its output in terms of new legal acts. And I think one challenge is how do you get Brussels to think about how they use the existing enforcement powers they have and a lot of the soft law power that they have that's inherent in the legislation that's already done to bring about change, instead of just thinking, okay, let's generate this many new regulations, which is what happened in the last 5 years.
So, thank you so much, Lucas and David. We must cut off here. Lucas and David will stay here after the event, so if you want to further discuss about the policy brief or any other topic, they know everything about Brussels policy bubble, so please go ahead and talk to them. But let's move on with the program now.
Yeah. Let's now move on to our next keynote. Our second keynote is Professor Jürgen Bott, who will tell us about financial industry's contribution to data economy as sustainable engine for Europe. Jürgen is a professor of finance management at the University of Applied Science in Kaiserslautern. He is also academic advisor to the EC to prepare legislative acts or policy initiatives on banking issues. Please, Jürgen, the stage is yours.
Very glad to be invited today to participate in your conference. And I'm also very glad that I had the pleasure to listen to your presentation, because the people who are brave enough to talk about the Lisbon Agenda and the real idea we had about the Lisbon Agenda, those people are really rare. And therefore, I'm very glad. I also would agree with you that after we had all these immense efforts to achieve SEPA, and what we have seen finally, we did not reach what we expected with the SEPA and what we promised, what we politically promised with the Lisbon Agenda. Therefore, I was looking during the last few years always for small practical examples how banks could make better use of data they have and make better use of data of their clients, that they do this in a combination. So if I take your picture, in my presentation I would like to put the bank a little bit into this position of a trusted service provider. And I think there are three reasons why banks could be in such a position. One, in the core of banking business, there should be still trust. I know some banks lost trust, but it should be in the core of banking business. Second of all, banks have a very viable infrastructure in place where you can communicate sensitive data very fast and very protected. And third, banks have a lot of experience to be a kind of economic cluster builders. So if it works, let's go, okay. So this is about my agenda. I probably make it a little bit shorter. And, okay. Turn it around. Okay, turn it around, that makes sense. So, and that's coming back. Other way around, okay. So, if you read the financial stability reports of the International Monetary Fund, you will see that they are really critical with the business models of banks. And even financial supervisor authorities ask whether banks will still succeed in the future to make better use of the remaining advantages. And the two advantages the supervisors see is this effective infrastructure and a high trust for the customers. Although this description gives little hope, it is banking industry that could pave the way for Europe into growth market of data economy. At its best, financial sector hoovers up information about firms and allocates capital with a view of future optimism. The central function of banking business is trust. Granted, there are some banks and some bank customers who doubt that banks can act as a trusted third party to which sensitive data could be entrusted. However, are you really confident that banks will use data to enhance society's overall perspective? Maybe not, but this is a really difficult situation for Europe because banks should be in such a position. And I believe there are at least some banks who still qualify to build these new data-driven networks to create new clusters. A bank whose business is legally restricted to a particular city or a region will understand that its own future depends upon the success of the local economy. A firm like Amazon bundles sufficient data to coordinate many different companies, some of which are even in competition with each other. Amazon is a business cluster in itself. Amazon is so big that it reaps sufficient scale economy in its cluster, in its own operations. However, for Europe, where we have a lot of small and medium-sized banks, alternatively, banks could take such a role if they are stand in their purest understanding as a trusted third party. They could play this role of a coordinator for a business cluster. Companies which are clustered together as by a trustful bank are enabling to reach similar economies of scale like the big elephant would do. Now I'm skipping a little bit to save some time. The burning questions for banks and board members of banks are how to get access to data and how to monetize the opportunities associated with this data economy. If you take, for example, no, I have the right side. No? Still? Okay, other way around. No, no, no. So if you look at some recommendations of international consulting companies, they actually see 4 possible strategic options they can follow. I will focus on the last 2. In the international discussion, the business models for payment industry, for example, continue to evolve towards the management of data, management of the currency data. The potential revenues of traditional services, such for example the transfer of funds between bank accounts, that really declines. The price paid for static data of European customers can reach the average annual amount fee for account keeping. Even more is supposed to pay for the data that come from financial transactions. The transaction data from bank services are particularly valuable because they provide information about effectively executed business. In contrast, for example, the data about serving behavior just expresses interests. Basically, there are, according to my opinion, at least 2 ways how banks could use data into a business model. The first one would be, that's okay. No. The first one could be sell data to third parties for marketing purposes. You probably know already a lot about such business models. Therefore, I will not have to elaborate on these business models of selling customers' data. I would even advise banks to be cautious about engaging in such business models. Too easily, the customer could feel to be sold entirely. The bank would lose one of its biggest assets. Therefore, I will concentrate today on the second block of business opportunities. Banks could enrich and refine the financial transaction data enhancing from banking services. First, to improve the quality and effectiveness of their own internal processes, and second, to offer new services to push up sales and reduce financial risk. I have often heard from regional bankers prejudiced that data economy is just for big international companies, which can work with enormous quantity of data and complex algorithms. For regional companies, however, there are hardly any new process or business model. This is a misbelief. I will give you 2 examples, maybe one, we'll see how much time we will have, how banks could help their customers to increase their sales. Financial services are of major importance for sales. We are all familiar with export promotion credits usually granted by public development banks. Goods and services are easier to sell when financing is included. High quality products made in Europe have their price. With the onset of the financial crisis, several European manufacturers made the sad experience that their customers were no longer getting the valuable machines funded by their home banks. Take, for example, a high-performing laser cutter. Such a machine can easily cost 800,000 euros. The buyer of these machines are often small companies with less than 20 employees. They're so-called job shoppers, who work in subcontracting as suppliers of large companies. In order to be competitive in international tenders, they need state-of-the-art machinery. But they do not have much scope of additional lending, and they barely provide any further collateral not pledged yet. So a classical financial product to solve such a problem would be leasing. What I'm talking today is not telling you a new financial product. The financial product in itself is nothing special. However, what I'm talking today with you is about the process. How a machine builder can provide financing services to their potential customers. For the sales success, the special machine manufacturer, it can be decisive that the offer of the machine and its financing are available to the customer at the same time. It can be even more beneficial if the potential buyer can already be shown during the sales discussion that the machine and valuable extensions are affordable to the buyer. To make this possible, the processes of configuring the machine and the processes of creating the financial offers must be synchronized. If you recently bought a new car, presumably you've got simultaneously to buying a car a financial product. A car salesman probably showed you how minimal the lease rate will change while they added extra equipment to your car. Do we have already similar services for small and medium-sized manufacturers of high-quality machines? How many of you would say yes? Okay, one. How many of you would say no? Okay, some more movement. So only maybe the big companies have situation infrastructures like that. But Europe is designed of small and medium-sized companies. They need this support. And who else could provide this support than banks? A first simple recommendation for Euro banks to participate in data economy would be therefore to build real-time data interfaces between them and the core players of their target market they serve. That sounds like a non-brainer. However, be careful. Banks are highly regulated. If you try such a strategy, have at least an in-depth look into the minimum requirement for risk management and study carefully the new product procedures. So I think just to save a little bit of my time, I skipped the second example, but I'm more than willing to give you this in the coffee break. And I jump immediately to the second section. The exchange of data between banks and their customers could also improve significantly the risk management. Let's continue with our example of the special machine builder manufacturing, serving in the high price segment. In this business field, it is common today to monitor constantly the proper functionality of the machines. These machines are in online monitoring or remote maintenance. Permanent stress machine parts are monitored, where parts are exchanged in good time to avoid machine downtime due to faults. Experts who know how to read the online monitoring data can say a lot about the machine usage and about the machine user. Is the machine only working a few hours a day, or is the machine running throughout the day? From the data, it can be seen whether a specialist operates this machine and whether the machine is used in normal range or whether the machine is operated in a red area. These data also provide information about the employment situation of the user and about the presumable residual value of the machine. These are two important indicators of assessing the credit default risk in leasing business. How many banks do you know which systematically evaluate maintenance data? Last year, a specialist in engineering company showed me 7 letters from international recognized leasing financiers who declined to enter into a project with the engineering company to use such data for credit assessment. Do you agree that risk models based on real-time data are quite different from models of assessing credit risk generated on the basis of annual accounts? However, such data are only provided to trusted partners. Banks that slip from one scandal to the next and leave the customer loans in crisis do not qualify for this kind of data exchange. So 8 minutes left. Okay, I'll try it. Another example. Market-friendly utilization of loan collaterals. Let's assume our shopper from our example above comes now in troubled waters. Then it will be probably unavoidable to use the collateral. And when a bank do with high performance, what should a bank or a leasing company with a high performance laser cutter? That it's taken from the defaulter's debtor's yard. Presumably the bank or the leasing company will try to sell the laser cutter as soon as possible. How will the manufacturer of the special machine react when it currently negotiates sales for new machines in the region the default debtor had give up his machine? The machine builder probably will not be thrilled that in the region where he's currently negotiating the sales of new machines, a good used machines is coming onto market. Are such situations inevitable? In a trusted relationship, collateral damages like that can be reduced. If the bank is already systematically integrated into the sales process of its customer, as described above under the example of sales promotion, then the bank has already major part of the data on ongoing sales processes. What should prevent the mechanical engineering company in such a relationship of trust also to provide information on most suitable second-hand markets? That's again the other direction. There is no doubt that strict supervising, I jump on this one. Okay, I skipped this example, sorry. Coming to the last point about banking supervision. As I mentioned before, all these models not can be established immediately, because banks are somehow set up in the supervisor environment. Banks are set up according to certain regulations. Therefore, when we think about this new data model, we also have to think about our banking supervision. There is no doubt that strict supervision can be a qualifying feature for good banking. However, too old-fashioned supervisory regimes can restrict the scope for development. European banking supervision should look closely at the possibilities of modern technology and data economy. There are already several individuals and working groups in the ECB and the Bank of International Settlement who recognized that, for example, the use of decentralized ledger technology can create new business opportunities for banks, but also create risk cancellation that are quite different from the risk cancellation which would arise from infrastructure applying traditional technologies. So, for example, with the digital technologies, we have the delivery versus payment process for exchanging central bank money against government bonds. There are two assets only. If you would go with decentralized ledger technology, we could have multi-clearing and settlement procedures in place. That really would change the risk situation. On the other hand, if you look, for example, on instant payment and the possibilities of exchanging information in real time, let's say within 10 seconds, and you use this in a reverse way as a request to pay, we could develop an entire delivery versus payment process for all kinds of products which the ownership could be digitalized. So what we have in place for securities trading, we could do for almost every product where we can have the ownership in a digitalized way. So similar situation as described with decentralized ledger technologies in those papers, you see they occur when making better use of data along supply chains. Banking supervisors can do their parts to create new forms of algorithmic gains. Swift development of new prudential models can make a significant contribution to helping data economy in Europe to break. Therefore, I strongly believe, if we still believe in our Lisbon Agenda, banks could play an important role if they change their understanding, because in the core there should be trust. They have very efficient infrastructure in place, and third of all, they have an experience of being cluster builders in economy. Thank you very much.
Jürgen, it was really valuable to hear about the data economy in the financial sector. It's really good to see somebody so enthusiastic about the financial products. All right, but we have now time for some questions. I think we have 3 minutes, so we could take 1 or 2 questions, and before we move on, please raise your hand if you have a question.
May I maybe a little bit of correction? I'm not as enthusiastic about the financial products. I think the financial products we have in place can stay as they are. What you really have to think about is about a new process design. So in my university, I always said, when I was a young student, I've been told you can make a lot of money with financial engineering. Now I tell my students you can make even more money if you become a financial process engineer. And I think this is the real key. that we have to change the processes, and a core element of it will be data.
Okay. Since there's one question there, I also want to ask a question, but let's have a David.
Do you see
Question
data
first.
portability for business, considering finance? Imagine this chopper, or do you see in the future the possibility of porting the data that they still don't have, let's say the leasing data, to another leaser?
I think I have
Do you think it should be?
a question related to that, because the PSD2 directive is the kind of like the key directive regarding the portability and the data economy. What do you see as like the best outcome of that, and what do you see as like what could go wrong in the PSD2 and the enforcement of that?
I think there are a little bit of different aspect, because in the flow of the information, what we have tried to achieve with the PSD2 is that outside companies can have access to bank data. What I described in my presentation is the other way around. I'm saying if you have a trustful relationship, you can use the data of your company. And I think there are more inclined to do so. There is one company called Trumpf. And Trumpf said, we have expired this experience, that our machines are no longer viable. Therefore, they set up their own financial service infrastructure. Already the second biggest in this competition is a Swiss company, Bystronic. Bystronic recognized, okay, these guys from Trump increasing their sales dramatically, and they even come into my markets. However, we are not in the position to set up our own company, an own financial company. And they have been desperately looking for some banking partners who have been willing to do such a project. Therefore, if you ask, yes, I think even companies are very easily to be convinced that sharing this data only with trustful partners, it's of their main benefit. So the other example I skipped, there we talk about tens of billions every year just with reducing the so-called bullwhip effect in supply chain management, where you can reduce the costs of logistics. Immense. But somebody has to be this trusted party in this network. And according to my opinion, banks would qualify for doing such a job. So therefore, I'm saying PSD2 is access to bank data. What I'm saying, banks should now ready to take data from outside, which they have not used yet.
Okay, that's a good point. So thanks again, Jürgen, for your time, and we will move on now with the program.
Okay, first of all, I will give this to Markus. And Markus will change the slides this time. Okay, after this speech is painting a big picture of data economy, let's now kick off the first panel discussion. Our first panel will discuss how to put the EU data economy to work. Now let's welcome Janne Känkänen from the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment, Maria Rautavirta from the Ministry of Transport and Communications, and Olli-Pekka Rissanen from the Ministry of Finance to the stage. The panel will be hosted by Jaana Sinipuro from Sitra. Welcome.
Okay. It's a little bit shame to always be so squeezed in time. I think would have plenty of learnings to learn from Professor Bott, but anyway, because Lucas at the same time was putting lots of pressure for us being active and working during the EU presidency on the actual measures. Let's now spend about 20 minutes or so discussing about how to put these frameworks and EU data economy to work. So from framework to practice, our basic assumption here has been like the GDPR isn't enough. It needs to be more real-time, near real-time data access, machine-readable data formats, oversight and good practices. But Janne, could you start? Do you agree? And what are the actual measures we should take?
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation. First of all, from Sitra to be able to be in this panel. We have a nice lineup of civil servants here, so we are trying our best to entertain the crowd. Indeed, the Finnish presidency is around the corner, and we've got a pretty full agenda ahead of us. I'd maybe like to sort of paint a little bit the let's say the so-called big picture first before going into the details of the data economy. That being at the forefront of the, let's say, anticipated Finnish presidency priorities and the agenda going forward. As we know, we don't have the government in place yet in Finland, so that means that we are not able to confirm the political priorities for the presidency, but at the very late stage. And that will probably then happen as soon as the government will be there, but that's not going to be there yet. So that has caused us some, let's say, gray hair at the level of the civil service that has been doing the preparations. Nevertheless, we have been doing quite a bit, and our focus has really been on the next 5 years. We know that this is a very crucial year for the Union as a whole. We talked about the Brussels policy bubble in the excellent presentation given by the Lisbon Council. Indeed, there's a lot going on in Brussels now, and that sort of vibrant activity is very much focused on the way in which the Union actually will look like for the next 5 years. So we've been talking about sort of let's say a more comprehensive approach to sustainable growth, and that is let's say an expected focus also from the presidency, maybe at large, but especially from the growth and competitiveness area, from the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment. In the sustainable growth area, one of the very key issues is digital economy, and I'm pretty sure that the colleagues will agree, and that this is going to be one of the key areas. On that, we are really talking about data economy. We are talking about a need to actually devise a more comprehensive roadmap for the regulatory landscape on data. And I think there was a good reference made also in the previous presentation to the fact that in Europe we have a lot of activity. We have a lot of activity around data economy in Brussels, but it is fairly scattered. I don't want to be pessimistic. I'm not saying that it is completely siloed, but obviously it has those features. It is a bit sort of stemming from the different policy areas, be it at the level of the European Commission, the different DGs, be it at the different ministries. And we have been trying our best in Finland to kind of forge a coherent message around this, and we are continuing to do that. But the ministries are then actually silos as well. And then you have the governance structures also at the EU Council level, which means that you have the different councils doing their different respective responsibilities. So it's not easy, governance-wise, to have a sort of an holistic view on these things, but we are now trying our best, and I think this is a very crucial time, as I mentioned, for the next 5 years. If Europe really wants to sort of find a proper response to global competition that is out there, and to be able to sort of leverage on the technological development that is ongoing, and also if Europe wants to kind of really address the climate change issues, which is of course not directly related to data economy, but which is nevertheless extremely crucial. So I think we need to shape up this year, and after the European Parliament elections, hopefully we have a situation developing, then we'll be able to sort of forge a common agenda that really has meaning for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. So pooling scattered activities together is an efficient way. What about Maria? What's your thoughts?
Well, first of all, for the Lisbon Council, very nice report, and I find it very important that during our presidency and the discussions around the GDPR, we have a framework that provides us the words to have that discussion. Because now that we are entering the implementation phase, we need technologies. Of course, we need portability mechanisms, but we also need, and I like the sentence that access and portability are not just the geeks' affair anymore. So it involves everybody in the sector to think how we can implement better the ideas of GDPR. And during the presidency and for the Europe, we would like to continue this discussion with everybody on what are the principles, the overarching kind of basis for going through the sectoral silos in order to create that interoperability. Because we see that the broader picture we take, we always find new silos, new fragmented solutions for data, the semantic data, the structural data, how processes have been built. Even within the mobility sector, we have different processes for logistics, for mobility services, for maritime, for all of the modes. So we have to go having the big picture, the horizontal principles, but then we have to do the concrete work as well. And that involves everybody.
Yeah, very good. And Olli-Pekka.
Yes, maybe I have to start from about this about the presidency situation, because last Monday we visited Luxembourg and DG Connect a couple of units, and when we step out from the building after the day of the negotiation, I say only, oh no, oh no, oh no, but in Finnish you know how to translate it. and because the wish list of Commission for us was long like a hell. And they said, yes, we know that this is going to mean the work like a hell for you, but could you? And example, what Lucas already said, that we in Finland, we are too modest. It was immediate. Because for this discussions, I sent for them our policy report, this report, Selonteko, about information policy and EI. And they said, yes, this is just the right direction for Europe. Go on. Because when we did our preparations before this meeting, we think that maybe, yes, this is good for Finland, but is this good for Europe? And the message was so strong from the Commission side, from the Connect side. Of course, the situation same is in a Commission, that there is no so much political support, because they are waiting also the elections, and it's a civil servant level in both sides. But I think that now we have to rethink rather much what we are going to do during our presidency. And here it's good that we don't have government just now, so we have more time to do that. Because we really have to listen what the Commission is from us, and I believe that. And it also means, because it was a Monday, and our Director General continued the discussion yesterday in Brussels, so we have to put the pieces a little bit different.
Okay, very good. Janne, please.
Thank you very much. Just to add that that one feature that I have observed in the discussions in Brussels and in the capitals where we have visited quite a lot now in preparing this at this civil service level. One striking feature in relation to data economy and digital issues is still that it is quite hard to actually forge a sort of a political momentum around this or behind these issues. And I think that's something that we really in Europe, but also at the national level, need to address. So to sort of elevate the data issues at the core of political debate, and also trying to set clear objectives and setting clear ideas on how to respond to the challenges and propose clear solutions. We need people like these, people like you here in this group, and we need sort of a articulation from technical level to political. Otherwise, it's not going to happen, because the decisions at the end of the day will be done at the political level. And I think there's a degree of disconnect there still that is in part related to this problem that we operate in silos, but it's also a more general question that this still sounds fairly technical in the ears of political decision makers.
Yes, so there was a comment earlier that we should have a narrative in place for ordinary people, so maybe it's for the politicians and policymakers as well. We need narrative. Maria.
About the narrative, I think the third way could be explained that it's an time for open ecosystems and time for level playing field for small and the bigger ones. So kind of bridging and building the gaps with APIs, with open tool kits for everybody to join. I think that's the way forward, because otherwise we will lose the value chains to the big players that can then set their own standards, how the data is accessed and how the consumer is being served. So it really needs a big effort to push the open side of the development, because the markets and the value chains are on the side of the closed and one-to-one kind of deals, where you can pretty much cover all of the players in your value chain, and trying to find the incentives also for these open ecosystems and open standards is it's a money question.
Yeah, of course. Then actually, Maria, if you could continue a little bit about this sector-specific measures or your civil servants doing a very practical actions. So when we are saying that government can show some good example on promoting data economy and open data, what are the examples that are most close to your mind, thinking practical examples we can do?
Tactic for our presidencies that we talk less and we show more. So we show what is working and what we have done here in Finland. You can come here and look at the maritime ecosystem where data is being exchanged between competing players. Come here and see what the My Data people are doing in their conference. Come and see all the solutions we have built around the mobility as a service, and how we have there built the consent management, and what kind of tools we have implemented in order to fulfill our kind of incentives and regulations on that. So we have the regulations, we have the steering of our administrative sector, we have the stakeholder cooperation, and all these tools we have used to generate data-driven transport sector. And first you need to have the data, then you have to share it, then you have to create code of conducts and mechanisms and toolkits, the APIs and the semantic data. And we have done quite a few in our sector, and now it's time that we already see what it's providing, and showing that brings a concrecy on this debate that we are now having in a very abstract level in many fields of development. And I think the health sector can provide similar examples as well.
Yeah, so promoting the whole nation as a test bed for trustworthy innovations. Janne, what's your view on this, leading by example?
Absolutely, that helps. I remember from 2006, I was luckily away from the EU issues a little bit in the meantime, but I was also involved in the 2006 presidency. Then we had Nokia, then we had ICT, then we had the fantastic success of that side. So we promoted innovation policy. Innovation policy was at that time, believe it or not, it was a new concept at the EU level. Nobody talked about that, and afterwards you've obviously seen a lot of people talking about innovation policy. So we were able to lead by example there. One should not exaggerate that though, because I think that can in a way turn against you as well if you overdo it. So you might sort of find a right balance there, but I think that's absolutely true. That what might
you'll just brag about Finland.
No, that's not gonna help.
Okay, Olli-Pekka, would you like to add
Yes, of course, I believe also that we have to have good examples, but the government can be example in some cases, but if we go to the new areas like sharing of data business to business, then the government can't have an example, because we are the government, we have different rules in the play and different roles. And an example, this business to business sharing of data, I believe that we have to go to sector by sector, because if we try to be at the very general policy level, because the devil is in the details, and the benefits could be different in different sector. the same what is good for health sector is not the same which is good for chemistry industry. We have to go through the sectors. And there's one, I'm a little bit afraid that in commission, new upcoming commission, they start their work at the beginning of next year or end of this year, and very soon they make some plan what kind of regulation they should do. And there is no time for regulation yet. So we have to go through these examples and go through these tests and pilots, and if somebody can have some ecosystems, we have to look what is there and before we go to the legislation. Because Commission is very strong in implementation, but sometimes they are too eager to use the tool, what they see, and this is legislation or directives, what kind of any.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Do you have something you'd like to comment? Yeah. So let's go to the Finnish EU presidency and highlight some of the first of all, how to participate, how to give ideas, how to influence during the EU presidency, how can we collaborate during the EU presidency, and what are your organizational views on concrete measures, concrete actions, what you're planning to do in promoting these things during the EU presidency? Maybe Olli-Pekka could start, because from the Ministry of Finance you have a very broad view on what's happening. So
yes, and just because I don't just now know what we are going to do, because we have to change our plans because of the response for the Commission side. And one what we have now already think after these meetings with Commission, that maybe, because we have example, we are going to have a conference on digital government, former e-government conference. It's a long series of these kind of conferences, but now it looks that it's a time to totally rethink the concept. An example, how we can have citizens involved there. And so we need some actions that the digital government is no more like some tasteless general ideas how we can have better services for citizens, but it should see more as how we listen to citizens. This is something we have done here in Finland, but when we go to EU level, suddenly we are moving to the policy level and forget the citizens. Listening to citizens somehow.
Yeah, very good. Maria?
Yes, data economy is definitely a priority during our presidency next fall, and we have already started kind of the building the events. The climax is our data economy conference in late November in Finland, where we gather a high-level representative of decision makers and companies in whole of Europe and also abroad. But then our national working towards the presidency, we have the good practices of involving stakeholders in all decision making, and that is what we also want to continue during the presidency. So we are preparing principles for the data economy, and we are planning to open them for debate on internet, and also organize some events around the visions and the ideas we have. And then of course we are collaborating with all the other events during our presidency organized by, for instance, Sitra, VTT, and My Data organization, and so on. So we are kind of looking at what we are providing. The experience from Finland will be the overall picture of data economy, the overall picture of modern economy, because we see that we shouldn't maybe after a few years talk about digital economies or data economies, just economies. And that is the kind of the direction where we want to lead the development and do it our way.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you very much. A lot of things, obviously. One thing is, and that I would like to advertise as well, we are just in the process of publishing a paper that will come out as a Ministry of Economic Affairs paper called Perspectives on the EU Strategic Priorities, New Design for Sustainable Growth. And at the heart of that paper there's also digital economy and how Europe should sort of strive at a position to be a digital leader globally, but of course based on the responsible third way, if you like. So that's something that I'd encourage everybody to read and comment as well ahead of the EP elections, by the way, as well as the presidency. Then obviously event-wise, we have a whole stream of events coming. One important event at the political level, because at the end of the day, political level is the level where these decisions, whatever they will be resolved, and new solutions will be then translated into more practice. So there will be what is called an informal ministerial meeting in early July, just to actually kick off the whole presidency. That will gather the ministers responsible for competitiveness issues, industrial and research. And there we are going to promote very strongly this sort of a holistic view on sustainable growth, including digital economy. Thank you.
Yes, thank you all. I think on Sitra's behalf, we are doing this project very openly, so this maybe there's a small call for action on iterate on the question on how to engage the citizens and what are the appropriate ways to get more citizen engagement and ideas during the presidency. Anyway, thank you very much for your insight, for a very nice panel. I think there are some seconds left for questions.
We have now time for this citizen engagement. We take two questions. So we have here two questions, and then we let you answer.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Mika. I represent Eurodigital, representing 12 European countries and their citizens as well. I'm asking about, since OECD has reported that Europe has lost about 20% of its tax foundation because not having its own platforms and the economy. Germany is already stating by its Gesellschaft für Informatik that Europe should have a software sovereignty by producing own software and the platforms that would actually manage the data economy. We also had a project in an Aalto University several years ago. We created a data economy, actually taking care that all data was owned by the users for 100 organizations, over 300,000 users. So how we are taking and tackling this outsourcing of the economy as a part of the economic question for Europe?
Next question, please.
Yes, I'm Martin Willebrandt. Glad to hear that you are planning to continue on the e-government steps. I was hearing, and also glad to hear that you are planning to in a way, rethink it. I think there's an opportunity here with the data economy and the citizen participation, because they would quite naturally fit in together. Since e-government is a way of producing data which the citizens would be controlled, it's a one source for the data economy, and that would also possibly be a natural way of developing the e-government approach, which also has quite nice history there. I'd like to hear your comment on that, and also perhaps on the political awareness level. A typical tool is to make declarations. There was a Tallinn declaration 2 years ago which focused on the e-government side, so perhaps there would be an opportunity to make a Helsinki declaration and building on top of the e-government towards the data model. Just some thoughts on that, and I'd like to hear your comments.
So, European platforms and e-government, and Lucas, by the way, made the Tallinn declaration, so all right, please.
So on the first question on the outsourcing, I think that is exactly why we are doing this job, is to build a strong European data economy that can compete against our rivals. And in that, the fragmentation and that the fact that we have 27, usually we have also 27 different regulative systems and processes behind certain sectoral solutions. So we have to dive deep in order to get scalability and interoperability. That is the core when creating digital services. And consumers' attractiveness, identification management, and so on and so on. There are a lot of things that the big platforms are doing better by performing for the consumers, and we have to kind of take that as a benchmark and reach for the level of service that the consumers want, not going against the big players, kind of getting them down as well, but providing something that we can raise our heads in the competition.
Maybe just to add very quickly, easy questions as always, but the leakage of economic value from Europe, let's say, to rest of the world in the digital sphere, very crucial point. I think the talk about European sovereignty is an important one, and I think it's a fitting one in certain sense, but it also contains risks in the sense that if it sort of ends up meaning that we sort of resort to protectionist measures to counter these kind of perceived threats that come from the new business models, the data-driven economy developed elsewhere, that's not probably going to be a very efficient response. So I think one needs to put that also in perspective. The other point is that I think that was not mentioned at all, was the role of competition policy. And I think that's something that is under very intense discussion for the moment, at least in the Brussels bubble, that deals with the sort of ways in which competition policy should actually respond to the behavior of big platform companies, most of all. And that's, of course, interesting to not only observe, but also influence. Thank you.
And only shortly, we share the citizen Mika worry about the taxes in Ministry of Finance. It's a high level in our agenda. About this Tallinn Declaration, Helsinki Declaration, Tallinn Declaration is until 2022 or something like that, but maybe we should add something to that declaration because the word has changed rather much and quickly.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. This was really important discussion, and we absolutely must continue this dialogue. But we have to move to our next panel, and the next panel will talk more about how to accelerate the creation of new services and ecosystem. The panel is moderated by Jyrki Suokas from Sitra. So without further ado, welcome to stage Kimmo Mäkinen from the Ministry of Finance, Matti Ristimäki from Tieto, and Antti Viitanen from Novartis. Welcome.
Okay, we'll continue the dialogue by listening to the other stakeholders. We had some questions from the citizens, but we're going to hear more about the government, of course, but then a company which is dying and striving to utilize data more in their business, and then a company which is providing services to these companies to create the data economy. If I may, I'll frame the discussion using the great model from David's and Lucas's presentation, the virtuous cycle of data economy. The consumer demand, but also not just the consumers, as OP was saying, that we also need to listen to the businesses and have them also involved in the data economy. And then going over to the data portability or the data sources, the companies, the organizations opening up the data vaults that they have so they can be utilized by the service providers. And this classical three-party chicken and egg problem does need a solution. And a solution to a chicken and egg problem always is the rooster. And the rooster is, that's right. And the rooster here is the business model, as David was saying. And you were hitting the right nail on the right head and even driving it through the right wall. That actually what is the right business model to actually start creating new innovations and benefiting for those innovations, the companies, but also us as a society. So what are the right actions to actually start the innovations? Now, if I start, Kimmo, with you first, questions that, what do you see, and this is a loaded question, as the role of the government? What is the best way to accelerate the innovation? More regulation, as we all love regulation, or something else?
Maybe not more regulation. As previous speakers already mentioned, and I like to emphasize this, that public sector should set an example with its data. And I repeat, public sector should set an example. I think that's very, very important. And of course, today we don't have very clear guidelines and regulations for sharing personal data or how to support consent management. So it's really, really key issues to solve, especially I think consent management, as the policy paper so nicely points. It's a question we need to tackle not only in national level but also within the European level. And the idea that we should have this kind of a like public-private trust within the consent is very important as well, because I think today we don't have that, and it's clearly missing that we don't kind of like, we can't trust each other in a sense that the policy paper points that we should go. And of course there is also the question about education, which is very important. I think, at least I personally, I'm a bit worried about how citizens can understand what fair data economy means, and what is it that my data starts moving around, and what happens when I'm not very much interested about this in general, or how could I raise the interest in this area. I guess these would be at least on my mind at the moment.
Thanks, Kimmo. Antti.
Yes, thank you. I'm talking more about from the healthcare perspective on this question. So, I mean, GDPR, Article 20, secondary use of data. That is for us an issue, and what is the regulation is, of course, we need some more clearer guidance, some clearer avenues how this is related to consent. And I take an example of clinical studies, for example, is that we have a consent for the clinical study, but we have to consolidate the data. We have to analyze the data again and again and again for the purpose of, for example, marketing authorization. And this is this under the GDPR, how the ethical committees and how the consents should be done in a way that this works. So I think that is an important issue. Also, what we are seeing in with regard to other member states, I think Finland is a very good situation. We have a fantastic secondary use of secondary data law. That is a fantastic. But if we look on other European countries, we have a problem there that in some countries, under the GDPR, some countries have been even making more restrict legislation on data privacy. So even before GDPR, which has gone completely to the wrong direction, and in those countries we are tackling with the use of the data. So I think that is something what we would like to see that our government during the presidency takes up, that as there is this full review of GDPR in 2020, spring 2020, the issue of secondary use of data will be addressed, and of course we would like to see that it's addressed on the healthcare sector, where we really, for the patient health, we need the data. But maybe one thing which I was a bit missing from this Lisbon Council paper is there was this lead by example roadmap, and I tried to read it, but I couldn't find self-regulation there, company self-regulation. And I think that is a very important matter. What I'm seeing as the fair data economy thing is that how we can drive self-regulation of companies. if there are wrongdoings, and if the companies are doing wrong, as we have seen those grave examples, very bad examples, which have been deteriorating the trust of the citizens to provide the data. And I mean, that is really the basis for this matter, is that we get the citizens to provide the data. And if there are wrongdoings, this platform is going wrong direction. There is, of course, some aspects. Everybody's saying self-regulation, but I think we need really to have a discussion, ethical discussion about companies and their own self-regulation. That is really something I was missing in this roadmap. Put the pressure. We have to put ourselves the pressure to us. Otherwise, we are not making the benefit out of the data economy. What we are thinking, if citizens are not trusting us that we use the right way the data.
Thank you, Antti. And then viewpoint from a great Finnish company that apparently has put data in the core of their strategy.
Yeah, maybe some word about the competitiveness of the Europe in the digital platform side. Somehow Europe has failed this competition already against the US and Asia also. And I would say that US companies like Facebook and Airbnb and whatever, they kind of succeeded in building a great platforms. And if we compare that in the Europe, we don't have basically none of very big platform companies at the moment. Spotify, maybe 10 billion euro valuation, but in US we are talking about the 1 trillion euro valuation companies. And somehow we should be more opportunistic also in the legislation point of view in Europe, because now the GDPR is a great legislation, but it's kind of barrier of creating business in this side. And that is kind of increasing the lack and gap between the US market and European market, which is creating the services in Europe even harder than it was before. So somehow we need to think this global competition that how European companies are kind of empowered to build these services at all. And that need to be solved if we want to build a global platform in Europe. Otherwise, we are kind of failed this again.
Very good point. Matti, the room begs to differ with your opinion that the game is lost. The halftime score from the Twitter is that 100% of us is saying that EU still has a chance. So anything can happen in the second half, as we saw with Liverpool last night. Okay, sorry if somebody missed the game, but anything can happen. Excellent points, and sort of coming to our next question, directing to you, Antti, first, that if we say that we don't need more regulation, but what kind of support could you, companies, and then turning over to Matti next, could you use? Education was mentioned, and not just education of us individual citizens, but the employees of the companies understanding these new technologies and business models and so.
Well, I think this. Many of these questions or support what you needed are actually addressed in our national health sector growth strategy, which is very good with biobanks, data genomic agenda, one-stop shops of data and so forth. So that is very good. Maybe couple of thoughts. I think it was discussed already. This how we communicate the benefits of the data to patients, to citizens, to everyone. And there I think what we could do jointly with the government, what we should do jointly with European Union is trying to communicate benefits. What is the benefits of this data economy for me as a person? So that is there are, if I think of health sector, there is obvious health benefits, there are obvious socio-economic gains. And I think those things we need to address. Another thing which is in the Lisbon Council
brief is this roadmap providing infrastructure. I think that is something that we need to address, and we need to make much more on that, is that how we are standardizing the data, the raw data, how we are standardizing the raw data, how we ensure the quality and the methods of collection. So all of that is something I think we need to support. And then finally, yes, knowledge, skills, capabilities, a bit more kind of health professionals understand better the data economy, and vice versa, the technology people understand the sector substance better. So that is on the education perspective.
Yeah, I think that we should somehow focus to the areas where we are kind of strong already, because we are so small country that we cannot win all the games. We need to kind of select the must-win battles, and I think that there would be a couple of strong areas. The basic problem in the platform economy is the chicken egg problem that you already mentioned, that there need to be at the same time a big amount of consumers and service providers. The platform is nothing if there is nobody using the services, and there will nobody using the services if there is no service providers in the platform. And that's the whole clue in the game. And if every company tries to build its own platform, it means that it cannot be so. So end of the day, there is only one platform per area. And we need to be very wise that what are the bets that we should put on there. And I would say that healthcare sector is one where we could be perfect. We have a good kind of a history in putting all the kind of agencies together, for example, in the public safety side, where we've been able to build a common platform for whole nation. In healthcare side, we could build a digital SOTE, so that we have one single digital platform which orchestrates all the SOTE services and consumers. And that could be expandable, because that would be very credible platform also internationally in sense. The other area would be a machinery manufacturing industry, where of course there is not the private data, but there is a machinery data, because in Finland we have a very strong history and roots in that sector globally.
I totally agree that we need to show the benefits, like how can we measure those benefits and how can we communicate those benefits. Also, I'm thinking about what's missing, maybe not so clearly in the policy paper, but it's very crucial that we have this API economy, like understood what it means for the also for the fair data economy. And I know, for example, that public sector is not very good example at the moment how API economy should be pushed forward. So that's also something we should more emphasize on. And for example, when you think about implementing API economy, it's completely, there's no standards or like common habits how to access different APIs from the perspective of a legal person, or like how artificial intelligence based smart agents could access those APIs. We don't have those standards today. So that's really something that if public sector would kind of like set an example, then private sector could consume more APIs of our data sources as well.
Absolutely, and data being the core and the essence of all of this, and I think there's a lot of even philosophical discussions about what actually is data. We have many professors in this room contemplating actually what actually is data and how it can be used, and what could be done, and picking up on Matti's point about the picking the battles you can win. The machinery data, Jürgen's example of the unexpected and maybe even unplanned use of the machinery maintenance data for financial sector purposes to start looking at the sort of who actually are the customers building new financial products and sort of infinitely reusing the data in many, many different ways, and the data actually staying the same, but the value being created by analyzing and refining the data. Antti, from your viewpoint on a global company, what kind of activity do you see around the globe in the sort of utilizing data, and are we in the forefront here, or is there something happening also outside of Finland?
For sure, there is a lot happening outside Finland, and I think we are in a pretty good position, and we have the platforms, we have the common goal with public sector to make this happen. Our challenge is, of course, a little bit that we are a small nation, and when we try to compete with, for example, if we think of genomic research with the UK genomic research, we are in a bit of a challenge with regard to just the magnitude, and that is an issue. That is an issue we need to, which means that we need to be even better, and this is requiring the public-private partnerships, and which other countries they are not that good. As I mentioned, the legislative problems with some other countries, and there we have a possibility to be better. But yes, a lot of is ongoing on research side, how we can make our research more efficient, how we can make our products more targeted, how we can follow up them better. And all of these precision medicine related things is really there is a vast amount of activities all around the world.
And Matti, from almost as global company as Novartis, data flows and freely across borders, and you operate in many of the European countries. So, your viewpoints on activities?
Yeah, I would say that the common problem with the most of the Nordic companies and maybe the Europe companies also is that the kind of data infrastructures that the companies has built are quite old ones, and that means that those are built for collecting data only for kind of archiving it, not for using that data. And that means that the general data quality that companies are having in everywhere in Nordic is quite low, which is not enabling easy this kind of new services. And that means that huge amount of investments need to be done to the platform level, kind of technical platform level, to even enable that kind of new services. And that's thing that many companies are doing at the moment.
And those kind of innovations, they are expensive in the boiler room.
Yeah, that's kind of the problem, that everybody would like to do a great AI services and so on, but if the infrastructure below is not enabling that, then it's kind of difficult situation.
There's only one Finnish government still. Let's see.
Yeah, maybe I take two practical examples what's happening at the moment. I was here on Monday at this same hotel. It was the first meeting, national meeting about, and it was a workshop about how to implement single digital gateway in Finland. It was like a very, how should I say nicely, shocking moment. Because we were like 30-40 people here, and as we realized what we have to do by the end of 2023, like all those mandatory services, 21 mandatory services cross-borderly available in Europe, but not only those 21 services, but even more services, as we realized during the day that as we are a more digitalized country, we need to put more services available. And there is this once only principle also there. and how do we implement that once only in principle within the context of Europe? And I'm betting now that the answer is that at least it has to involve the idea of how this personal data should be shared, like you are in the center way. It has to be part of the solution. It can't be just agencies talking with each other. It can be that, but it also needs to be answered like from the human perspective. That's one example, and just one other example would be like there are also, not only in Finland but also in European level, lots of discussion about self-sovereign identity. What does it mean, and how does it react towards eIDAS, and how can these two worlds work together? And there are ongoing pilots now trying to figure out, like we have a couple of interesting projects in Finland, and I know that Germany, for example, is very much actively pushing self-sovereign identity also in the European level. The idea is that the identity, personal digital identity and my data and personal data, they are kind of like, are we talking about the same thing or are we not talking about same thing? It kind of confuses people, and this is also something that we need to set the terminology and so that we talk about the same things.
Absolutely, and the terminology and speaking the same language and understandable language is really the key. And before we get rudely interrupted by Markus and get stopped here, I'll squeeze in one more question, sort of on a Donald J. Trump scale, tiny like his hands and huge like his ego. What is your personal assessment of the value of data economy?
Well, I think it's huge. Maybe one thing what I have to address on this, that I think that in particular in healthcare but elsewhere, is that what we need to think about, and when we develop and when we are working with the data economy, we need to think what is the value that the data economy is providing to the patient, to the human, to the citizen. What is the value that it's providing to the healthcare system? What is the waste it is going to take out of the system? Because global assessments analyze that there are 30% of waste in the healthcare systems. So what is the waste? What is the cost effectiveness of this data economy to the system? We are playing a little bit with the zero-sum game, and it means that to make this data economy in healthcare grow, we need to take that somewhere else. And also it's important that we are starting in Europe, elsewhere, we are starting to analyze socio-economic effects. So what is data economy, what is medicines, what is the healthcare providing, for example, by reducing sick leaves or improving working ability. So I think that is a key question of the growth of the economy, that it provides, that we assess the value. Sorry for a long answer.
Okay, now we have minus 10 seconds. Matti.
I think the value is huge, but it also needs huge investments to release that value. So, yes.
Yeah, I'd prefer not to mention Trump, since we don't have any fact-checking people here. But yes, the potential is very huge. I agree also. We need to have a new mindset in our society towards sharing personal data. That's very key issue. But also I expect that this consent management frameworks, open APIs, and trustworthy digital identity, we need to set them as a default design principles among machine speed, data access, and machine readable data. That should be a design principles as default. And the last point also about the potential. As I come from Ministry of Finance, I have to mention that it's very interesting, kind of like this fair data economy can be seen as a very interesting mean of re-evaluating government spending on how we implement different e-services. It's very interesting in that perspective as well.
Thank you, Jyrki. And thank you all panelists. We used all the time for the questions and answers already. Before the closing remarks by Jaana, I would like to thank you from me and Laura's behalf. I think it has been an inspiring day, and I'm really looking forward for the concrete actions that will follow these visions that we laid out here today. But now, Jaana, would you like to give us the closing remarks? And for all of you, you can stay here and discuss with the panelists and with Lukas and Ilves after Jaana finishes. Thank you.
Yes, so thank you. I'm still very happy to invite you to contribute still in the incoming months. We've been collecting some comments for the policy brief, and that's still open for commenting, so we will use that as a feedback when we are preparing our Finnish version and a policy brief for version and shorter version for the policy brief. Next week we will go global together with the Finnish Ministry for Foreign Affairs and IAAA, promoting the topic of fair data economy in the UN Strategy, Technology and Innovation Forum in New York. So it's going to be very interesting times. But topic for today has been a data economy, and we started with trust and brand. And I think that sounds very much like a business. So for the incoming months, we will focus more on the business side. 6/6 is a very important date, the 6th June. We will have our event. We will focus on corporations and business side. We will launch our corporate survey made in 4 European countries, draft for white paper and so forth. So stay tuned. I promise that it's going to be an interesting journey. So on Sitra's behalf, I would like to thank you all, people online and people here, giving your time to listen, and wish that you will stay tuned in the future as well. It's going to be inspiring, fun, and hopefully impactful months ahead. So thank you.